Greetings and salutations, friends, and welcome back to the Horus Heresy Lore Breakdown. We are now on book number 26, Vulkan Lives by Nick Kime. This is a little bit of a strange one, very much so, but we'll get into the strangeness as it arrives, and right off the bat we do have a little taste of it. Vulkan talks about Istvan. How, eventually, despite fighting, of course, amongst the heaped corpses of his sons, he was eventually overcome by hordes upon hordes upon hordes of Night Lords, eventually being brought low by their knives and bludgeons and being brought face to face with Conrad Kurz, who then, presumably, killed him. Then he hallucinates that Horus kills him, and he hallucinates that Guilliman kills him, until eventually the face of Kurz appears in front of him. Now, we already know that Perturabo has built a prison for Vulkan. We learned that, of course, in Angel Exterminatus, and we will be learning far more about that construct over the course of this story. But for now, all you need to know is that Vulkan has apparently died 4 times, and yet the story is still going to continue. Then again, the title Vulkan Lives probably already reveals that to some extent now, doesn't it? We then also get a brief glimpse at Erebus, who has managed to teleport away from the Conqueror, of course, after getting his ass kicked by, I was about to say Angron there, but no, by Khan, of course. Ah, poor little Erebus. Apparently, his stock has fallen quite significantly within the Wordbearer's Legion, but he does still have some followers, although the book makes it very clear that his followers are shrinking in number rather rapidly. It would appear that Erebus, his big gamble was Calth, of course. That was his big hoo-ha, his plot to gain infinite power and all that nonsense, and really prove to everyone that he was every bit as chosen, every bit as exalted as a Lorgar. And that didn't really quite work out the way he wanted it to, now did it? And even worse, he is now being humiliated by Lorgar for his failure. Yeah, small surprise that his star is waning. But let us move on from boring old Erebus and instead get on to the supposed hero of this story, Vulkan. We get a rather interesting little scene where he is being interviewed by a remembrancer inside of his personal branding chambers. He has a personal branding chamber. I mean, I suppose I shouldn't be shocked over much. Branding has apparently a ritual significance to Vulkan, presumably something he picked up on Nocturne, where it's kind of like an oath of moment, it sounds like. He mentions that he has one more oath to take before he orders a specially made servitor to plant another brand on his pitch black flesh, which is apparently practically covered in these burn marks. That seems like a hefty way to write a shopping list. It's like, oh, today I vow to walk the dog. Psst, ah! Seems harsh, but then again, Nocturne is a pretty harsh place, so I guess this is simply just the way they did it. There is also the mention, of course, of Vulkan's origins. Apparently, he was a blacksmith's son, having been adopted by one and taught the craft of the blacksmith. He also mentions that he very much so respects his father, quote-unquote, for this. And indeed that he... how do I put it? He seems not offended, although maybe that is the correct word. He seems a little bit... a little offended, actually. A little bit miffed that the Rembrandtser would ask the question like, oh, you were born to a blacksmith. Wouldn't you say that's a little humble, almost? Doesn't use quite those words, but he then immediately states that, I respected this man a great deal. He was a fine father to me. That's kind of cool. This whole thing gives Vulkan a little bit more weight. I like it. It's a good scene. I wouldn't think that, a scene in which a superhuman warrior type gets ritualistically branded by a robot made specifically for the purpose would ever make me find that person more sympathetic, but, well, here we quite clearly are. There's also something almost, I would say, humble about the whole thing. Like, Vulkan is engaging in an oath of moment that is painful. Obviously, I mean, the salamanders are clearly far more resistant to fire and that kind of pain than most. I mean, otherwise, I imagine the whole branding yourselves with literal firebrands should... I doubt that would be a thing you do like every time you go into battle, especially considering how frequent an act that is for the Space Marines. But it shows that he puts tradition very highly. He values it, he thinks it's very important, and he is willing to put himself through this to honor that tradition. I kind of like that. I also like, again, how they humanize the salamanders a great deal. When the remembrance eventually passes out from the heat, after having lasted 21 minutes, the longest that anyone has lasted, Vulkan immediately darts forwards and catches her, and then sends presumably a signal to a pyre guard standing outside to immediately come inside the room and take her away and ensure that the medicaes get a proper look at her. That's pretty neat. I like that. He also mentions that she was strong and lasted longer than most, and so he is willing to talk to her again. That suggests also that Vulkan has been willing to meet with quite a few remembrances over the years, but he tests them. Like, how much do you really want to learn here? Are you willing to sit in my masochistic sauna room for half an hour and hear me speak? Like, what are you willing to sacrifice for this information, Oh, Christ. I mean, I hate regular saunas, so I sure as hell wouldn't last long in there. And speaking of the humanities, the salamanders are preparing to assault a fortified city, where apparently the local populace have subjugated themselves to some form of alien overlord. The Imperial Army commanders have come up with an estimated breach solution that they are sure will lead to minimum casualties. But Vulkan is not happy because, the minimum casualties estimate is for the Imperial forces, not for the populace of the city. He claims that the civilian death estimates, the collateral damage, is conservative at best, and even then far beyond what he is willing to accept. He instead orders that a hole be punched in the wall through which the Legion will then flow, alongside of a specialized formation of Warhound Titans, presumably quite used to operating alongside the Salamanders, because when Vulkan orders the Principe of this formation to not engage the city's soldiery, he doesn't even blink. The dude just goes like, right, don't shoot the enemy, sir, roger. He's clearly received some interesting instructions from Vulkan in the past, is all I can really assume with a response like that, in all due likelihood. There's also a mention of the Pyre Guard. The Pyre Guard are at once Vulkan's personal elite bodyguards, his honor guard, and they are also the leaders of the Legion, the chapter masters. And apparently they are also a bit of a unique pedigree within the Legion. They are very aggressive, very, yes, aggressive, but aggressive in a good way too. Not just aggressive in angry, like a certain Legion, but they have directed aggression. They are planners, they are thinkers, they are people who will actually react to the enemy and then respond with whatever is the best way to move forward, to minimize casualties not only for themselves, but also for the civilian populace of the enemy. They are also all Terran-born, which I found rather interesting. But they had all also developed the same pitch-dark skin complexion as the Nocturne members of the Legion. Apparently, it is mentioned that this is a combination thing. It is unavoidable. Once their skin has been exposed both to Nocturne and to the genetic makeup that is inherent within their Primarch's own DNA, then they will be transformed into these dark-skinned, red-eyed humans. Which is very interesting. That also clearly does suggest that this overrides any previous skin color as well. So regardless of whether or not they were white, brown, yellow, whatever the hell, before they became salamanders, once they are initiated into their ranks and are exposed to Nocturne's sun, which sounds like it is hinted at like that is a decisive thing. You have to be exposed to Nocturne's sun, otherwise it isn't going to work. Then they get that pitch black skin color. Interesting. So there is something both with the radiation of the planet that is unique, but also this is only in conjecture and combination with a unique radiation pattern. I wonder if any of the other ones are like that as well, like the Night Lords, for example. Do they only turn deathly pale? No, that can't be. Because surely there are tales of non-Nostraman-born Night Lords, and obviously Nostramo is blown into tiny little bits, so, well, there is no more radiation to be exposed to. Perhaps this is even a completely unique thing to the salamanders. Or alternatively, it's also possible that this is a small case of writer-itis where, because it is written a little bit oddly, it is written as if to suggest that it requires both, but at the same time, it seems strange for that to be the case. You know, what kind of unique radiation is present on this world to have this very specific and unique effect upon the Legiones Astartes? Interesting, nevertheless. To return to the whole invasion thing, the Salamanders are preparing to assault the city of Kharfan. However, they are not given the opportunity to do so. Vulkan has given the order that the civilian casualties are to be minimized, even at the cost of his own legions' casualties and the Imperial Army elements, and indeed even the Titan legions' involvement. But when they actually break the walls of the city and advance inside, it immediately becomes obvious that someone has arrived before them. The Night Lords have apparently given the city a quick little visit without the Salamander's knowledge, and they have engaged in the usual nonsense that Night Lords do when let loose within a major civilian population center. This does not please Vulkan overmuch, and he has a rather strained conversation with the Night Haunter shortly thereafter. Of course, Kurz maintains his own point of view that what he did was for the best. With these actions out of the way, the rest of the populace of the planet will beg for mercy, and Vulkan is free to grant them that mercy. Kurz states that this is his gift to Vulkan. Now, whether or not he did that out of the goodness of his heart, well, I would actually argue that there is a possibility that he did that out of a genuine feeling of bloody love. Yes, indeed, of bloody love. I was about to say brotherly, but honestly, bloody love sounds more fitting, everything considered, to be honest with you. It is possible. It actually genuinely is possible. If Conrad did indeed know that Vulkan was quite sensitive when it came to human matters, he may have viewed this as an opportunity to demonstrate why his way of waging war would be the most humane and effective. I genuinely do believe that there is a possibility that within his twisted and fucked up mind, Conrad saw a chance to appeal to Vulkan here, to go like, okay, you want to minimize human suffering? Well, I'm going to wipe out one settlement, one city, and then I'm going to demonstrate to you that the rest of the populace will surrender. And as Kurz points out, this was apparently a war world, and he had never seen a warrior give up without first spilling a little bit of blood, which, again, honestly, is a fair thing to say. But, depending upon his current state of mind, I might also then point out that it is equally possible that he did it all for the shits and giggles. And in the future, of course, we get yet another brief glimpse of Vulkan in Kurz's captivity, being tormented now by visions of Ferus Manus, and Kurz mockingly pointing out that yes, it is indeed impossible for Ferus to be here. It would appear that Kurz has decided to play some mind games with Vulkan, the reason for which, of course, will be made rather obvious a little bit later on in the story, though, again, the title has probably already given away the twist to some extent. We then get a long sequence with Vulkan at the bottom of what appears to be an oubliette, an armored hole dug into the ground to keep prisoners. Vulkan assumed that his dear brother Kurz had thrown him in this hole and forgotten about him, after having, at the very least, tried, apparently, to kill him by surrounding him and having him stabbed repeatedly by his Night Lords, that referring to the previous flashback. But Vulkan is not entirely alone in his hole, no, because Ferus Manus is there as well. Vulkan behaves as if he almost believes this apparition, but slowly but surely begins to shake it off. He also has another vision as well of home, of Nocturne, where Kurz apparently had slaughtered the entire population. He sees a vision of the Emperor ordering him to not kill Kurz before the void shields protecting the sanctuary city collapse and the massive volcanoes that are scattered across Nocturne break through with their magma and their fiery balls of nonsense, destroying the city. Vulkan eventually rejects this spectre of Ferus Manus because it frankly isn't doing a very good job at being Ferus. For one, it's far too talkative and far too negative, and so Vulkan begins to climb out of his hole, literally grabbing onto the welding seams in the metal. Shit. I'd almost find it more believable if he simply just clawed his finger into the armored plates, but rightio then, welding seams provide adequate footing for a, 2-ton Primarch to climb out of a hole. Very well. Once he's finished climbing out of the hole, using the fucking welding seams. I'm sorry, I can't get over that because I've seen some sloppy welds in my life, but somebody climbing those. Oh, anywho, the Night Lords have positioned guards near the oubliette, not on the oubliette or on top of it or staring down into it, but conveniently nearby so that Vulkan can smush their little skulls in. Afterwards, he tries to make a break for it, presuming that he is being held somewhere on Istvan. Although he feels as if he might be underground. He figures that maybe Kurz has dug tunnels to inter himself and possibly even Korax and his brothers as well. Underground, eh? But however, Vulkan's dreams and hopes of a rapid escape are soon smushed rather thoroughly when he realizes that, hey, this is an airlock I'm in. And oh, what's that blaring sound? Meh, meh, meh. Oh, the doors are opening. Fuck. Spaceship. Not Istvan at all. And so Vulkan is sucked out into space. Now, of course, we know that that wouldn't actually kill him because Gulliman wandered the deck of a void ship, but hey, details, just go with the flow, okay? He's dead. Wink, wink. Until a chapter later, he's not dead again. You know, the first time he got sucked out of the airlock, I was actually a little bit surprised, like, oh, that was sudden. Well, I mean, Gilliman survived this, so I guess he'll hammer his way in through a hat somewhere, but no, he appears once again in captivity. This time in the middle of a raised platform with huge gulfs on either side, too long for him to leap. Meanwhile, Kurz is sat perched on one lip of this crater, this prison of his, taunting him. He's also referring to the Ferris Mana sitting in a corner. It is very clear that what dear old Curse is trying to do here is break Vulkan's mind. Specifically, he is trying to find something, some weakness that he can exploit, something that he can expand upon, because frankly, Kurz is becoming a little frustrated with this whole situation, really. He talks to Vulkan as if Vulkan annoys him, as if Vulkan has done something to him, as if Vulkan is harming him almost just by existing. He comes across as defensive, as spiteful. You know, he's always spiteful, you might say, and yes, you would be correct, but more so than usual. You know, he comes across as somebody who knows he's in the wrong, who's trying to find some way to argue himself into the right, if I can kind of put it like that. It's a little bit difficult to put into words, honestly. He tries to goad Vulkan, and with very obvious questions too. That's kind of what strikes me the most. When Vulkan states, for example, that he is loyal to his father, Kurz shoots back with, which father? Referring, of course, to the Emperor, or to Vulkan's father on Nostromo, the blacksmith. This is a very weak jibe from the Night Haunter. Like, it's the equivalent of a yo mama joke, essentially. Like, this is Conrad Kurz we have here. He has turned psychological torture into an art form, and yet the best he can do here is like, oh, did you really swear fealty to your father on Nostromo or to the Emperor? It's like he's running out of barbs, almost. And the reason for this soon becomes apparent, as he, and I do love this line, by the way. Vulkan goes like, he's listening to you prattle part of my torture? Come on then, bring it, bitch. And Kurz just goes like, well, yeah, your torture will continue, there will be pain, there will be much more pain, but I don't think I shall kill you this time. We tried ice, now let's try fire. And the reality of the gulf that Vulkan is capped in becomes clear. It is a furnace. I believe even it was mentioned that it was some kind of outlet valve for the main engines of the spaceship. So clearly something capable of producing tremendous heat. And these valves are then opened, and the furnace streams in to burn Vulkan to cinders. Now, of course, Kurz has already kind of let slip, like, oh, I don't think we'll kill you this time, and then opens a goddamn furnace to the ship's engines. He knows. And he's also trying to... Another thing, too. He tries to taunt Vulkan with like, are you really so blind? Do you not know? Don't you understand what you truly are? And he isn't referring to it... how do I put it? partially, he is referring to it like, okay, Kur's like, oh, well, I'm a murderer. And Vulkan's like, yeah, you're a traitor, you're a killer, you're a betrayer. And Kur's like, yeah, I know. I know what I am. But what about you, brother? I saw you kill one of my servants. A woman in the control panel, she broke like a reed when you punched her. And Vulkan's just like, oh, yeah, so what? That didn't require anything of me. That didn't take strength. That didn't take perseverance. I simply just killed one of your servants. And Kurz then kind of pivots and goes like, well, I didn't really talk about... I didn't mean that in specific. I mean how you won't die. He's prodding Vulkan to see if Vulkan himself knows that he just won't die. And presumably, it's also hinted at that this is the latest in a long line of attempts where Kurz has tried to kill Vulkan, but has failed. And it's genuinely driving Kurz crazy as well, because bear in mind, Kurz's entire idea is that whilst he may be a monster, he is a monster of necessity. He doesn't choose to be the Night Haunter, he has to be the Night Haunter to preserve peace. He's always told himself that every horrible action that he commits is for a greater good. It is to avoid the terrible future that he sees every night when he dreams. And he eventually, he's essentially telling himself that, okay, yeah, I'm not the villain, I'm not the bad guy here, I only do what's necessary. And all of those hypocrites are like, no, that's not actually how it is, you know. I am actually the good guy. He's like, no, you're just hypocrites. And here is Vulkan, the exact opposite of him. Vulkan is kindness and compassion and care for the little guy made manifest, and Vulkan wants to dirty him. Vulkan wants to break him. Vulkan wants to show that he is no better than Kurz, and he wants to do this partially by breaking him. Breaking his mind, breaking his soul, breaking his body, and yet Vulkan won't fucking die. To Kurz, bearing in mind also that he is going slowly insane, that must seem as if the universe itself, the fundamental truths of the universe, is rejecting him, is rejecting his thesis and his ideas of that he's actually doing the right thing. I mean, imagine that, like, you base your entire worldview and like everybody's as bad as you, and at the end of the day, as long as you can just kill the people who go like, no you, then you can laugh at like, ha, see, I was right all along when I killed you, your morals meant nothing. And yet, here's Vulkan, he kills him, and it just pops right back up again. Oh yeah. That would drive you nice and crazy, alright, no doubt about it. Now we get a break from Vulkan and Kurz torturing one another, and instead we head over to a person by the name of Sabaton. Oh well, not quite, but I like to read his name as Sabaton instead, because, well, it reminds me of the Swedish band Sabaton, and they're awesome. A bit retarded on the copyright side of things, but still awesome, so there you have it. Technically, we've already actually talked about this group, or, well, not talked about it, but this little thing has already been happening in the book for quite some time, but it's one of those things where a little bit of stuff happens and then nothing happens. And then a tiny bit of stuff happens and then nothing happens. So I figured I'd all just summarize it here in one larger segment instead. Sabaton, whose real name is, of course, John Grammaticus, is fleeing from word-bearers somewhere presumably relatively close to Istvan, as the word-bearers mention that there are no loyalist forces in the area, and that they are too few and scattered. And then some loyalists show up a little bit later on, suggesting that they are probably not too far away from that blighted little planet. John Grammaticus has been brought back to life, again by the Cabal, to go and excavate a relic which he describes as a spear tip of some sort. And this thing is so very important that the word-bearers have dispatched several Astartes to hunt him down and bring the spear tip back to them. Meanwhile, there is also a major ritual going on where one of the word-bearers' dark prophets are sacrificing a huge number of the local population for some undoubtedly nefarious purpose. This small group of word-bearers dispatched after John Grammaticus is then killed by the Loyalists. There is a small group of them, including a Raven Guard, an Iron Hand, and a Salamander, a small group that also has access to some security measures like tarantula sentry guns. They snatched Grammaticus for no other reason than because, well, the word-bearers apparently wanted him, and so they figured, if they want him, we probably want him too, or at the very least, we'll drag him off and, put a bolt round in the back of his head to deny him to the enemy. But since the person in charge is a salamander, they don't just execute him immediately, which is what they would have done if any of the other ones had been in charge. Now, they do, of course, want to try and figure out precisely what it is the word-bearers are doing here, and John Grammaticus at first tries to trick them and move them on to some other subject material, but due to the presence of a librarian, he is not able to do so. Grammaticus, of course, is a low-level psyker, but nothing compared to a Legion librarian, of course. This also hints that the edict against librarians have been reinterpreted somewhat since Istvan. Unsurprisingly so, honestly, I'd almost expect them to have done this sooner, but yeah, they have been a little bit under pressure as of late after all, so getting rid of the Edict of Nicaea is probably something that required a little bit more in the way of discussion, but now, clearly, they have moved away from that due to practical reasons. John Grammaticus therefore eventually gives up and states that whilst he was semi-lying about them being on an archaeological expedition, he wasn't lying about the fact that he had been sent to recover an artifact, namely the spear tip. But just as he is about to begin informing the Loyalists about this, the word-bearers show up, tripping some of the sentry guns set up by the Loyalists and warning them of their presence. And now they need to beat a rather hasty retreat, whilst the local religious zealots try to regain their prize. As to whether or not they will meet with any fortune in that endeavour, well, you'll have to wait after the advertisement break to figure that one out. An actual ad break this time, instead of the 50 other that have probably been scattered throughout this video randomly by YouTube. Fun fact, the YouTube mid-roll advertisement algorithm basically seeks out every period of 5 or so seconds of silence and inserts an ad in there. One day, I'm just gonna randomly shut up for 5 or so seconds and see what happens just for the fun of it. Anywho, back to the point. The Loyalists have left their little hidey hole and fled away from the incoming word-bearers who triggered their little trap. A pair of tarantula sentry guns ensured that a lot of word-bearer cultists and even a couple legionnaires would not be pursuing the Loyalists any further. Unfortunately, the spear tip that John Grammaticus had been sent to collect is no longer in the Loyalist possession, and there are still a few word-bearers left on their trail. The Loyalists, led by a salamander, then continues to press Grammaticus for the exact nature of his mission to this planet. Grammaticus obfuscates. Of course, it's his only real option in this particular circumstance, is it not? He claims that this world is special. It has significance. The Emperor had apparently visited it once, and from what we've heard previously, with statues of a man in golden armor, that seems likely to be true. And due to the Emperor's once presence, the world has special meaning to the powers of the warp. And so the word-bearer's cleric, its priest, is carrying out mass sacrifices of pretty much the entire city's population to open up a warp rift, perhaps, a conduit, some manner of horrible, unholy ritual to taint this, well, holy place, I suppose would be the correct terminology. The Loyalist Space Marines, of course, don't really know all that much about that yet, but they do know that the word-bearers are doing something here, and they would rather they didn't achieve their objective. And so their goal is the assassination of the word-bearer's cleric. He also, the Salamander leader that is, presses John Grammaticus on the nature of the spear tip, which he insists emphatically needs to be recovered. He says that it is not actually a spear tip at all, it is a fulgurite, a real-life manifestation of captured lightning, and to add yet further fuel to the Salamander's fire, he also mentions that it apparently has some form of connection with Vulkan. He asks specifically if the Salamander still believes that Vulkan lives, and the Salamander says yes, emphatically. Despite not having any evidence, he is completely convinced that his liege lord is still alive. He asks how this fulgurite might have any effect on that, but Grammaticus doesn't really know. All he knows is that it is somehow linked to Vulkan still being alive, and that the fulgurite will be needed in the future, which it will. Now, of course, this certainly piques the Salamander's interest, absolutely, but he doesn't really have the option to go back and try and get it regardless, because it's now in the hands of the word-bearers, and so all they can do is fade away and prepare for a lightning offensive with the objective of assassinating the cleric. They leave behind all the weaponry that they cannot carry, and leave for a rapid strike with the hope that after having assassinated the word-bearer's leader, they will be able to extract 2 waiting transport vessels and back to a ship in orbit. Optimistic, but hey, it's always nice to have at least a potential out, isn't it? But before the Loyalists even managed to move out, the 2 word-bearers that have been tracking them and that survived their trap, word-bearers by the name of Narik and Dagon, hunters, snipers, and specialists in the art of ambush warfare, have discovered the Loyalists' hideout. The Loyalists number no more than 20 legionnaires, no match for the vastly superior word-bearers' force on the planet, but Narek and Dagon are of course only 2 word-bearers, and so are not going to be launching any open assaults. Instead, they settle into sniping positions and vow to kill 4 legionnaires for the 4 word-bearers that were killed by their trap. And they very nearly succeed. They get 3 of the Loyalists, and a 4th shell ricochets off one of the Loyalists' armor and strikes John Grammaticus. Whoops. That's going to be a little bit of an issue for, well, pretty much everyone involved, really. The Loyalists return fire and chase off the 2 snipers, and then they need to figure out what to do with the human. Now, it's time to return to Vulkan for a little bit again. He has miraculously survived being charbroiled alive over a massive furnace, and he is a little bit confused about how precisely that has happened as well. He theorizes that perhaps he possesses some kind of incredible regenerative power that he was, up until this point, unaware of, and, I mean, yes, in a way, that is one explanation, certainly. Though, I think we're probably beyond the point of mere regeneration here, but oh well. This also shows us that Vulkan is actually completely unaware of this special gift he has. He also talks a bit more about the compliance action at Kharfan, where apparently the Night Lords were as good as their words. Kurz had said that after making an example out of one city, the others would surrender, and that they did. In fact, they surrendered so thoroughly as to also give over the covenant of Xenos sorcerers that had enslaved them, the 12 Eldar witches. Vulkan is, conflicted about this. On the one hand, this was a bloodless victory. Best kind of victory. But on the other hand, wouldn't that also then mean that he would have to accept Curs's theory that making an example out of one city spared the others? And Vulkan really doesn't want to do that. It goes against pretty much everything he knows and believes in. The Night Lords aren't making it easy either. Whilst the next city is surrendering, the Imperial Army has set up administratum booths to try and judge who was complicit in working with the aliens, and who was simply just, peasants, workers, those beneath the perfidious boot of aforementioned aliens. A considerable task, as I am sure you can imagine, determining the guilt and or complicity of an entire city of people. Yeah, that's gonna take a while. Whilst this is going on, the Night Lords are annoying the Administratum Adepts by, getting a little bit too close to them, moving towards them, forcing them to shy away, intruding upon their personal spaces, and just wandering around like massive nightmarish monsters, frightening the locals. You can see that already the Night Lords have started wandering quite far away from their original idea of necessary cruelty, and more in the direction of cruelty for fun and entertainment. There's also the 12 Eldar Witches. They are being kept separate from the human surrenderees, of course, as, well, I guess they're trying to figure out what to do with them. But then a riot breaks out as the Witches try to escape from their grasp. This leads to a stampede of the civilians who, hundreds, if not thousands of them, get crushed to death against the Imperial Army cordon surrounding them. Vulkan personally shoulder charge a fucking super heavy tank to push it out of the way, to allow for some of the civilians to escape from the crush and therefore save their lives. After that, he marches up to the Eldar, who are engaged in psychic combat with the Night Lord's librarians, and incinerates all of them with his wrist-mounted flamers. One of them miraculously survives and offers up her surrender, an Eldar child, apparently. I can't even imagine the idea of an Eldar child. A race that lives on for tens of thousands of years. How would even such a... That's an esoterical question for another time, I think, actually. She surrenders. Vulkan says no. No, you don't get to surrender again. You surrendered once. Whoosh. And kills the child as well. Again, like the very idea of an Eldar child, and an Eldar child as member of a covenant powerful enough to enslave a world. I honestly think this is more of an author flourish to be like, oh, look at Vulkan, he was so mean to that evil kid who enslaved billions. Rather than anything else, and knowing full well that we wouldn't give a shit if he flambéed an adult, I suppose. Anywho, Kurz then voxes him from nearby and goes, ha, see? You're not that different from me either. Which, of course, leads us back to the whole thing that Vulkan is torturing Vulkan. Kurz is torturing Vulkan specifically to prove to Vulkan, and more so to himself, that no, Vulkan is no different. Kurz isn't the monster here because his brothers aren't actually that different. They aren't actually that superior to him. And then we return to Vulkan's cell, where he is hale and hearty once again, but he has a new guest. An Eldar, apparently. And when closer attention is paid, it also turns out that Vulkan is no longer in his cell. Instead, the area he is in bears a great deal of resemblance to the Eldar creature's staff of white bone. Wraith bone, then. Alright. The Eldar then goes on to speak to Vulkan about, well, the thing we'd almost expect them to speak to him about. He tells Vulkan about how they, presumably referring to the Eldar in general, had attempted to contact others of his kind before, It sounds even as if he is specifically talking about the attempts to contact Ferus Manus, which ended, of course, with Ferus deciding to attack the envoy because... why the hell did you even try this? It's the goddamn Gorgon, and you're like, yeah, we can have a nice, relaxed little chat with one another. No. Turns out, you can't. I could have told you that for free, but hey, details. This apparition is trying something a little bit more basic. He's not trying to convince Vulkan of anything in particular. He's simply saying that Vulkan must live. You must live. This is the last time I can come here to face you, and you must live. You are important to the plan. Whatever the plan may be, he cannot succumb. And he also talks about seemingly how he expects his mind to begin shattering. He even seems kind of taken aback at how Vulkan has apparently already taken leave of at least some of his senses. How this Eldar can... This is what always annoys me about the Eldar. They always seem to know everything, or at least pretend to know everything, and yet they're always so shocked. Like, oh, really? A few weeks in Kurz's torture dungeon has screwed your mind over, has it? Well, I hadn't seen that one coming. Right, I see. Well, it has. Beyond that, Eldar doesn't tell him a whole lot of true value, frankly, and then fades away as the next set of tortures is revealed. Vulkan finds himself in a small room facing off against a one-way glass. Then Ferus Manus, which we at this point pretty much know for sure is just Kurz using some form of glamour, or it might even just be Vulkan's tortured mind, that is also entirely possible, shows up and starts speaking to him. A pair of chains attached to Vulkan's arms begin pulling taut, and as they do, he sees a massive slab weight start to fall from the roof of the chamber that he is looking into. Inside of the chamber is a bunch of Imperials, Imperial Army personnel, remembrances such on, innocent civilians by all accounts. They shriek out in panic, of course, as they see this massive weight barreling down towards them, and Vulkan swiftly realizes that his chains are attached to that massive weight. And the only thing that could prevent it from falling right on top of these very unfortunate souls is him pulling taut on the weight, thereby preventing its fall further down and crushing this group of Imperials. Of course, Vulkan being Vulkan, he puts every ounce of strength he has in keeping this monstrous weight from falling and crushing the poor unfortunates inside, whilst Ferus mocks him for it, like, oh, why do you suffer? Why do you fight against it? There is no victory here, brother. This is a foregone conclusion. Why do you resist? Let go, let go. And of course, this is a foregone conclusion. Kurz was never going to let him disobeyed the odds. The very construction of the trap is so that eventually Vulkan would run out of strength. But all of this is again a part of the ploy where Kurz wants to demonstrate to himself as much as anything else that no, Vulkan is not pure, Vulkan is not perfect, Vulkan is not noble when push comes to shove. Even Vulkan, the Lord of Drakes, will relent, will give in, and prioritize himself over the lives of others. The problem, of course, is that Vulkan doesn't give in. He keeps desperately trying, even though, again, he absolutely knows that there is no winning this. Until finally, of course, as it was inevitable, the weight becomes too much for even a Primarch to bear, and the weight falls and crushes the civilians inside. I really liked that one. I really did like that one, because it was one of the first moments when I truly realized what Kurz was trying to do. One of the first moments I truly felt like, oh, he's not just torturing Vulkan, he is trying to prove a point. He is trying to demonstrate to himself that Vulkan is not perfect. He is trying to protect, essentially, his own fragile ego. It is a brutal yet still very cool little part. And it's swiftly followed by another interesting one as well, which I find doubly interesting, really. So, back to our word bearers and their nonsense on the planet. It does indeed confirm that the word bearers are on this world specifically to... taint? I suppose would be the correct word. A world touched by the Emperor. That is the point of the massive word bearers ritual. And the cleric, Elias, also mentions that he will require a vast quantity of blood. He is already just now cleaning himself up from the last ritual before moving forward with another one, when Narek arrives and informs him about the plans of the Loyalists and their position. He then also shows Elias the Fulgurite, the lightning spear, and this leads to a very interesting conversation. Elias is very clearly falling prey to what, to be fair, most of the Wordbearers Legion is falling prey to: hubris and their own ambition. The Wordbearers Legion falls apart very quickly in this regard. They begin planning more for their own advancement, more so than the benefit of the Legion, very, very quickly. Now, as to why this is, well, we can speculate all kinds of things. Is it because they were already pretty far gone to begin with? Is it because they had already taken part in the Pantheon's blessings? Is it because the people who were appointing these apostles were people like Kharfan and Erebus? Or is it perhaps an inescapable consequence of the warping powers of chaos? I think, honestly, all of them together might form the real reason, that there is no one single hard and fast reason, but instead simply all of these things taken together, forming the seemingly inevitable consequence. At least, that's how I would probably view it. But then Narek says something very, very interesting. When he is handing the Fulgurite over to Elias, he is very hesitant about doing so. He refers to the Fulgurite as divine, a word that has somewhat fallen out of favor as of late, as Elias corrects him. The Pantheon is divine. This object is merely a part of that, a lesser entity. It is a way towards divinity. It itself is not divine. Interesting. But Narek stays on his point. He brings up the Emperor. He asks him, brother, during all the years we were raising cathedrals and statues to the Emperor Glory, did you ever doubt his divinity? Did you ever question it? And here we stand, a piece of the Emperor's power made manifest right in our hands. Is this not proof? He doesn't say it quite so obviously, but, what he means is this not proof that we are on the wrong path? Is this not proof that we were right earlier? Is this not proof of the Emperor's divinity? It seems as if Narek has quite a lot of misgivings as to the direction of the Legion. When Elias brings up the Galvorbak too, look at the Galvorbak. Clearly they are evidence of the divinity of the warp. He simply states, Narek that is, that no, that is merely an entity, a demonic entity, feeding on the Galvorbak. It is a creature that lives off their flesh, which is, well, absolutely fucking correct. That is precisely it. That is even why we saw in the short stories previously that the demons favored hosts that would obey their command in all things. And they hated the idea of being betrayed, being left behind, being ignored. That was the things that would actually make them reject a host. That is very interesting. I think Narek here has got it spot on, but unfortunately for him, his opinion is most definitively in the minority within the Word-Bearers Legion, and he has a debt to Elias that he still needs to pay. And so he agrees that, yep, he's going to continue doing his job, and he is going to help defeat the Loyalist remnants, but once that is done, their compact is broken, and he is no longer bound to Elias. It almost sounds even like he is saying that he is no longer bound to the Legion. I've always been a little bit annoyed by the fact that the Word-Bearers never needed to cleanse their ranks like all the others. Or, well, they kind of mentioned that they in a way did, but it was very subtle and it happened long ago. But honestly, there seems to be a lot of Word-Bearers even now who are actively questioning the path of the Legion. I suppose the argument would be that they are not questioning it obviously enough so as to be detected, I guess, but I don't know. Even that just doesn't feel quite right, you know? Oh well. As a bit of a further problem, whilst the Salamanders continue to believe, at least their leader, that John Grammaticus is not talking complete bullshit when he says that Vulkan is alive, they fail to keep him alive, Grammaticus, as he expires from the ricochet bolter wound he suffered during the previous little spat with the Word-Bearers' hunting party. This does not really dampen the mood of most of the Loyalists overmuch, many of them having simply viewed him as an inconvenience, a random human they happened upon of limited, if indeed any, consequence whatsoever. But I'm sure none of them could even begin to imagine as well that it doesn't really actually matter overmuch if he's dead, because, well, he'll pop back up again soon enough, as John Grammaticus always does. And with that, I think I shall wrap up the first part of Vulkan Lives, and then we'll move on to the second one. So, until then, I have been Arch. Thank you all very much for watching, and I hope to see you all again soon. Have a good day.